what would your advice be like in terms of recommendations for students with particular, different research fields? How do they like find those conferences that would be best for them? Is that,
Yeah.
like outside of a simple Google search, like what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is talk to your advisor, whoever they are. And if they're not like a huge conference person, they're going to know who is. So either talk to them or talk to whoever they recommend to talk to about it. Also talk to the head of your department if that's somebody that you can have a conversation with, which I hope it is. The head of our department is great. I love the head of our department. So if I had some questions, I could just throw them his way. I had some it wasn't even a conference, but I was working with some collaborators. We had some upcoming beamline time, and it's in Europe. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there's funding for me to go. So I just asked around. Now I ended up not going just because, logistics, but that's kind of all it takes is just find someone that should know about these things and start there. Also talk to
Hello, everyone. So we have a special guest for today's episode, our very own It's a Material World team member, Kyle Matthews. So you may know him from our rapid research reviews on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts, where he summarizes material science research papers in 1 minute or less in a very informative and easy to understand manner. But his, day job, he's a PhD candidate at Drexel Nanomaterials Institute, focusing on Maxine research in Dr. Yuri Gagotzi's lab. And in his spare time, he's our outreach manager for It's Material World. So in terms of what we're talking about today, he's attended several material science conferences over the years, and we'll be discussing what it's like to attend MSE conferences, why they're valuable, and how to make the most of them. So welcome to the show, Kyle.
Hi, thanks a lot, Puneeth. I really appreciate being, brought out to talk about what it's like going to these different conferences and how you can make the most of them.
Awesome. Yeah, so I actually was never able to go to a conference due to COVID and then just not having enough research earlier in those years. So could you just explain to us what it's like to go to a material science conference and why we should attend them?
Yeah, so different conferences, of course, are going to have slightly different vibes. There are a lot of different material science conferences depending on what your main focus is. For example, ACS, MRS, TMS, and we can just keep going down the list. We'll get into that later. But really what you can expect from them is you're going to see a really broad array of topics, even in a focused conference, that goes beyond what your research is. And you can use this to kind of expand your horizons, as well as catch up on what is the up and coming and leading things in the field. You can look at the top research, go to the keynote talk, find out what's really at the top of the field right now. And you can also go to these talks that are tangentially related to your work and kind of expand on what you know. And of course, where there's these talks, there's people. And I would say conferences are the best networking opportunity that I've had in terms of research and PhD.
For sure. And it's been clear with, the value you've brought to its material world, just how much power there is to networking. Would you say just in general, for undergrad versus graduate students, there's different value add there in terms of attending, material science conferences? How do you make the most of it as an undergrad versus a graduate student?
Yeah, sure. There's definitely different angles to play as an undergrad and graduate. Some of them are going to overlap. It's just that what you're going for is slightly different. So it also really depends. Most of the time when you're going to a conference, you're going to present, whether that's a poster or a talk. Probably as an undergrad, you might be giving a poster. As a grad student, you could be giving a poster or a talk. They give different experiences. And now you might be giving a talk as an undergrad as well. So that's why I said there's a lot of overlap. But, the poster session is a great time to explain your research to people. And the people that are going to come up to your poster are people that you caught their eye. So hopefully there is some kind of connection you can make there. Maybe they have related research. Maybe they know your PI. Maybe there's a connection there. They work in the same field. You can build connections. As a grad student, I would say it's a double-sided thing. So essentially you need to do all that. You need to make those connections, but also you really should focus on conveying your research too. What you're doing could be something that no one else is doing. Or even if there are other people doing it, there's no one presenting on it in this conference or in the symposia at least. So you need to sell what you're doing to other people so they understand what you're doing. And that's kind of like the difference, I would say, between the two. And of course, at the same time, the networking that you're going to do is going to be a little different. As an undergrad, you might be looking to go to talks where you might be interested in going to those labs for grad school, or you want to meet with like national lab people. You know, if you want to go to a national lab, that's a great place to meet with national lab people as a conference. As a grad student, well, you're already in grad school, so you might be looking at postdoc opportunities. There are these connect with current postdocs for faculty position opportunities. I've seen this at like MRS, for example. So I would say it's the same goal of like making connections, but it just depends on the level, and how much you have to deliver depends on like what level you're at currently.
So did you go to both undergrad and graduate conferences when you were back in undergrad?
When I was in my undergrad, I didn't go to any conferences. I was doing research in my undergrad too, though. But I was also doing a lot of like non-research work as well. Like I did research in a metallurgy group that was doing characterization, and that was great. I also worked at Naval Surface Warfare Center, Carter Rock, doing an internship there, which gave me some experience like working in kind of like a lab setting like DoD. I also like I went back to research, but then I also did it because Drexel has a co-op system. So you essentially do 6-month internships. I worked at an aerospace company, so I was kind of flip-flopping between research and industry at the time. Mm-hmm. And the conference just didn't really come up. But I did have some like conference abstracts and like papers submitted for like MSNT type conferences or TMS. I'd have to go back and look, honestly. It's been a long time. But so I was involved in as a co-author in some of these works as an undergrad, and the corresponding PhD student went and presented the work. Now that I've gotten to grad school, I've definitely gotten a lot more conferences under my belt.
Yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit. You know, you've mentioned a lot of acronyms, right? So
Yeah.
what are some of those major, I guess, well-known MSE conferences, and what are their differences? And then also, you know, can you kind of discuss if you would recommend different conferences for like an undergraduate student versus a graduate student?
Yeah. Well, definitely first thing I'll say is I can definitely recommend different conferences for what you're studying. And that might also have an effect on like undergrad and grad. We'll see like as we get into it, but definitely what field you're on can affect what conference is like the most useful. The first conference I got to go to, if my mind is working right, is American Chemical Society meeting. So ACS, which isn't necessarily a material science conference. This is a chemistry conference, really, but it covers such a wide breadth that there's like material science, chemistry, lots of different engineering. It's a very broad and large conference. That was a great experience because I got to go, and it wasn't actually, I didn't have to present. It was a rare opportunity. We just got to go. There was an award for our PI, and a few of the first year PhD students got to go because we didn't get to do any travel because of COVID. So this was like the end of our first year. So American Chemical Society would be like that. It's like materials and others. Materials Research Society, MRS. I mean, it's in the name. That's like a huge materials conference. Everything there is materials focused. I'm a big fan of MRS. I've been there multiple times, spring and fall, and different cycles can be different as well, different experiences. And that can be tricky as well. So depending on what kind of research you want to see, whether it's the spring or the fall cycle will change, like what's going to be the main focus. But this is the kind of stuff that you can find on their websites. TMS, as we've talked about here. I mean, David and Puneeth might be able to tell more about TMS than I can at this rate, since we covered a whole episode on it. But I was just there past month. Another name I'll throw out, which is a really, really great opportunity, GRC. So that's Gordon Research Conference. Gordon Research Conference is different from all the others, but if you get the opportunity to go. That's my automatic suggestion. Undergrad, grad, whatever, if you get the opportunity, go. It's the best conference. I see, like, not the best, you know, I don't want to throw around words like that, but it's a completely unique experience that you can't get, I think, from the others. So it should be there in your list of experiences.
Makes it unique, Kyle.
Well, what makes that conference unique? So Gordon Research Conference is much smaller. One, you need to apply to go to the conference. You can't just register. You send an application. And if you're accepted, then essentially it will be you and let's say some number less than 160 other people. No one, you don't give, if you're like a PhD student or an undergrad, master student, anything like that, you don't give a talk. You give a poster. All the talks are invited speakers. So it's like every talk being a keynote talk, basically. Like I went to an energy storage one. Stanley Whittingham gave, like a talk that first night. It was great. Other people in the field gave amazing talks. Shirley Meng was there. She gave a great talk. So many others. I can't just name the entire list, but that I'm like, you can go look at the conference proceedings if you want to see the list. But it's like when every talk is a keynote talk, it's like the takeaway is like endless. Like my notes list was so full by the end of this conference after a full week. And it gives you the opportunity where you get to meet these people and interact with them. It's such a small thing. Everyone's staying at the same place. Everyone's at the same hotel. The meals are there. Like it's part of the experience. So you're going to like sit down and eat lunch with people that are professors, undergrad, grad student, everybody all together. And you just learn so much. And it's a great way to like definitely build some collaboration opportunities. And while I'll say it was the most facilitated, definitely you can build lots of collaborations at other conferences as well. We've built so many and we've made a lot of connections. Our group, when we go to these conferences, even the first conference I went to, we started a collaboration just from that. And it was sometimes they make sense and you kind of have it in mind beforehand. Other times it's just random. You meet somebody, they're working on something you don't even know about, and it turns out that there's an overlap. So that's why it's really important to take advantage of that opportunity. But yeah, the different conferences, like they cover different scopes. I will say Gordon Research Conference, there's many of them and they all cover different topics. So I can't say like what it's going to cover because it depends on which one you go to. I went to the nanomaterials for energy storage, but they've also had like a batteries one that's not about nanomaterials, like specific on batteries. There's a ton. There's like environmental science, like so many that are way outside of my scope. So like Gordon's great. So MRS covers, it's like the Materials Research Society. It covers like a broad spectrum of material science. ACS is like American Chemical Society, covers that. ECS is the Electrochemical Society. So it covers everything regarding electrochemistry. And there's a surprising amount of materials that goes into electrochemistry because everything that you're doing there is made of something. And usually what you end up doing in a lot of these electrochemistry works, aside from the higher, like the really industrialized stuff, probably stuff that like David's working on, you're going to be doing a lot of materials level characterization, to find out like what you're actually working with and what's actually happening. So let's see, MRS, ACS, ECS, TMS is great if you're involved with metals, I will say. They have tons of other coverage as well. They also kind of do like the broad scope thing, but definitely if you work on metals, TMS is great. Another one like that's big with like metals and ceramics, but also they still cover the full breadth would be MS&T, which is like material science and technology. They had their last one, I believe, in Pittsburgh, at least the last one that we had people from our group going to. So no, I haven't gone to that one myself, but it had an overlap with ECS. Otherwise, I would have tried.
Cool. So yeah, just like you said, that last one was in Pittsburgh, but all these conferences are all across the country. So could you maybe talk about how you get to conferences, flying, driving, etc., and then like how can like an undergraduate or graduate student really afford being able to do all these different experiences?
Yeah. So first step, secure funding. Before wherever it is, your university probably has a funding source, especially for undergrads. Like we have funding sources that our undergrads tap that I can't even use. They're for undergrads. I have to apply to different things, but we have specific funding, at least in our department, for undergrads to travel. So they just need to reach out. They need to do it. Take the initiative. Reach out to the head of your department. Reach out to your advisor. See what's happening.
On material advantage chapters.
Yeah,
material advantage chapters are a good way to secure funding for undergrads, at least.
That's great. And there are some that have like ones for grad school as well. Also, MRS chapters can do that, like for specifically to MRS and same ECS has chapters and does travel like that as well. So if your school has a chapter associated with the conference, definitely talk to them. But if not, there should still be some general sources to apply to. Like I apply a lot. There's a graduate travel subsidy through Drexel. I apply anytime it's open, of course. You only get so many, so it doesn't cover all my travel. Another thing you need to do is apply for funding through the conferences. A lot of them have funding opportunities. MRS is great with funding opportunities. You can get the Graduate Student Research Award, but you can also just apply to do assistantships while you're there, or like blogging for them, or like covering these different things, and they'll cover your registration automatically. So that's like, you save like $300 or something right there. ECS, I was happy. I got lucky. So I got a Drexel grant, and I also got the ECS travel grant when I went there. So I actually went to ECS for free. I got to see David while I was there. I was in Atlanta this past fall. And yeah, I took we took a quick stop to get some pizza. But yeah, I was able to travel there basically for free. I think the lab spent probably $60 on that trip. So, securing funding will enable you to go. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go without funding. It's just about how much, your advisor can actually do, because, even like we have a very large group. Well, that means everyone can't go. It would cost too much money. And some of these locations are harder than others. So my suggestion is always secure funding. But even if you can't secure funding, still try. Reach out, just see what happens. But also, if the conference makes sense in terms of location for some reason, then tell your advisor that reason. Like a good example, it didn't pan out for me just because I've been traveling a bit lately. I've been to a lot of conferences. I have other things coming up right now. The MRS spring meeting is in San Francisco this upcoming week. I would have loved to go, but I've just been bouncing around a bit too much. But specifically, the reason I wanted to go, aside from funding, is I have a good friend who lives 1 block from the conference, and I could stay there, and then it wouldn't cost any money for housing. That's a huge savings. So, of course, if you have a situation like that, like I went to a regional meeting, ACS MARM, Middle Atlantic Regional meeting last year in June. It was in New Jersey. I just drove. I didn't stay anywhere. I drove there, went to the conference every day. I just went back and forth. So, if you can save the money that way, or for example, MRS is in Boston. I don't fly. I take the Amtrak overnight. It's fine. Anything that you can do to save money will encourage your group and the department to send you to things. You should always, look for that. And also, there are tons of external funding. Lots of things that even I don't know about. There's especially if you have any particular background or something, like there might be funding specifically for you. So you just need to look at like what's out there. Also, if you're applying to fellowships, if you're a grad student, a lot of them come with travel allowances. So keep that in mind. Use them. Like, don't just forget about it because it doesn't show up in your stipend amount. Mm-hmm. You need to like ask for it. But usually you get like $5,000 or something. That's a lot. You can use that to travel for your whole PhD probably.
One more, I guess, just broader question before we get into some more details and logistics and things like that. But you mentioned a lot of the major conferences, but obviously there's a lot more that we just don't have time to cover today. So what would your advice be like in terms of recommendations for students with particular, different research fields? How do they like find those conferences that would be best for them? Is that, like outside of a simple Google search, like what would you recommend?
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is talk to your advisor, whoever they are. And if they're not like a huge conference person, they're going to know who is. So either talk to them or talk to whoever they recommend to talk to about it. Also talk to the head of your department. If that's somebody that you can have a conversation with, which I hope it is. The head of our department is great. I love the head of our department. So if I had some questions, I could just throw them his way. I had some it wasn't even a conference, but I was working with some collaborators. We had some upcoming Beamline time, and it's in Europe. And I was like, I wonder if there's funding for me to go. So I just asked around. Now I ended up not going just because, logistics, but that's kind of all it takes is like just find someone that should know about these things and start there. Also talk to other members of your group. Senior members, like they have to have done, if it's someone that does go to conferences, then they have to know where the conferences are. And I would say for lesser known conferences, the other thing is to really just look at the academic chatter on like LinkedIn and Twitter. Like, for example, we just had a conference in Philadelphia Like I didn't go. We had group members go, of course, though. We're in Philadelphia. Why wouldn't someone go? If there's like an overlap, which there was. It was like there was covering characterization and stuff. So we had people go that were big on characterization. It's called PitCon. I had never heard of it before, just because I wasn't really working on that. But obviously, you just kind of have to keep your ears and eyes open for things like this. I would say LinkedIn and Twitter can be pretty useful for that. That's basically like LinkedIn we use for a lot of things. I would say Twitter I just exclusively use to find like events, webinars, and I follow a bunch of bots for papers to find papers. So these kind of things can be useful to follow fields and organizations that you think are useful, and then they will tell you when they're doing things. But I'm an in-person kind of guy, so I say first reach out to the in-person connections.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So then now let's fast forward to when you're actually at these conferences, right? So there's always so many talks and poster presentations and just so many different like seminars you could attend, right? So how do you kind of wade through all of that, kind of avoid information overload and just, put together a plan to really figure out what's best for you? Is there tools at your disposal? How do you kind of prepare for conferences or when you get there?
Yeah. Well, I will say connected to that because I know it's going to get connected anyways. Most conferences do have an app, and that will be the first stop. That's the first stop because you need to look at what is going to be there. If the app like it maybe gets put out a little bit later, then you need to look at like the program. But I usually wait until the app's out to do like really start sifting through it. But basically, you need to go through the program, whether it's just the actual document or the app. And I basically fill my entire schedule while I'm there with talks that I would theoretically go to. And I usually have overlap. Like I'm going to go to this one or this one. So I just pick out talks that are either, I would say, ones that I feel obliged to go to, like ones that are like collaborators or people in my group, my PIs. Those ones like you should be at so that you can hear the relevant questions and keep up on your research. But then from there, I kind of just expand. Like I'm working a lot with zinc batteries. So I'll try to go to a lot of energy storage talks. Or, if I work specifically with MSE Nanomaterials, if someone's working on MSEs, I'm probably going to be interested in what they're talking about. But it depends, like you have to find that balance. Like, do you think it's going to be super relevant to you? One, or do you think the talk is going to be really rewarding? Like sometimes I'll go to a talk that I know doesn't have to do with my work, but I know the person giving the talk is gonna blow your mind. Like I'm always going to go to that Stan Whittingham, keynote talk because he's going to present some stuff that you're going to be impressed by, and but there's more than just keynote talks with that. You just need to look out for the names that you know. And if you're really in the dark, that's when you start asking like I would say group mates and your advisor too, like what talks. But really like the first thing I'll do is simply like control F and like search for keywords that are related to my research. That's really the first step is that. And then I'll fill in my schedule as much as I can with the overlaps and all. And there's two outcomes. Either it's still too sparse and then I'll try to like find other things to fill it, or it's like a little too much. Like sometimes there's a day where it's like, man, I want to go to all the talks, but you can't. Then I'll start kind of ranking them in some way, like which one is my priority? The rest are like extra. Like say I get held up in a meeting because you're going to meet a lot of people at these conferences. Maybe you get caught up in a discussion and then you're going to miss the first 10 minutes of the talk. Well, then maybe just go to one of the other talks that you haven't missed yet. Good. I always try to have like a backup, and keep going essentially because you don't know what's going to happen in terms of like networking discussions. Cause that's really, I think, what will drive your timeline by, I would say, the second day.
Yeah, so now that you bring up networking, maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. So one question I have for you is that now you're reaching towards the end of your PhD, you have like a lot of research and like what you think is interesting. So you have a very common base to do networking with. Like you will talk about energy storage in roughly your field, et cetera. So could you explain how that networking happens? And then also when you're like a first year and you didn't have like all this knowledge, like how do those different types of networking like kind of change as you grow like deeper into the field of your interest?
Yeah. So actually I'm gonna answer the question, but in reverse.
Sure.
So when you're first starting out, it's a little tougher, of course, like especially like, I'm a talkative guy, but you'll walk up to some really big name person and it's hard to just like open up a conversation when you're like, you're like I'm like a child. I would say the biggest help there is mutual connections. So if your group mate knows somebody and they're there too, and they introduce you, it just becomes a conversation, casual conversation, maybe formal introduction, and then it always becomes casual conversation. The other great thing is if your PI is at the conference, they can introduce you to people that you might not want to immediately introduce yourself to at that level. That helps a lot. Your PI knows who you should be introduced to, probably, like who is relevant to you to like really be like talking to extensively. And he or she can say, hey, like this person works on like something that you're working on. This is my student. But it's like that's like one answer. It's like rely on others. You should, but you could be at a conference alone. I've been to some conferences alone, and I even like this past I went to ECS Fall. I knew there were, of course, people that I knew and I had conversations with, but there were people I didn't know and who didn't know like me or anything I was working on. And you just kind of have to work up like I would say just make sure you're introducing yourself with some purpose. I wasn't just walking up to everyone like, hey, I'm me. No, I remember like there was a professor that I walked up to. They gave a really interesting talk, and they talked about some conductivity issues. And I just went over, introduced myself, told them like what I was working on, and I gave them some thoughts on conductivity related to the fact that I work on like metal carbides, which are more conductive than oxides. And they were like, thanks, and that was it. We didn't need to like figure out some kind of icebreaker. It's like everybody's a scientist. They want to hear what you have to say. So don't be afraid to just like share your thoughts. Just make sure they're like pretty collected. Don't just like fumble around. But if you can get that initial like introduction, that's great. I would say once you're more experienced, you should be comfortable at that point. Speak to people that are your peers as peers, and people that are above you, with some respect, and also like show them that you're engaged and listening. Like, give them some thoughts that they know that you actually listened to their talk and you have real thoughts about it, not just, oh, I know you're a big researcher, blah blah blah, I'm me. Like I got to have some nice conversations with Stanley Whittingham when I was at GRC. That was great. He's a very busy guy. There is still like 100 something people there. Everybody wanted to talk to him, I'm sure, but I did get to talk to him about some stuff, and like I wanted to make sure that everything I spoke, every sentence was like concise and useful, because I knew that his availability is limited. So I would say treat a lot of your conversations like that, though. Even if you have more time, try to like be concise and thoughtful in like what you're saying, and then hopefully it will open up avenues essentially beyond that initial introduction.
Nice. So from there, like, have you found yourself from like your first conference to however many you've attended now, like, has it been more efficient in terms of like figuring out who to network with, who to chat with, who to connect with, or what is that process like? How do you find these people too?
Yeah, and I'll say one thing, like if you make an impression, people will remember you too. So like, I go to a second MRS conference and I don't need to reintroduce myself to the first 20 people I see, because I still know them. They know who I was. Some of us have maybe even kept in contact because we're working on similar fields. Like for example, MRS is a great example for our group. There's a Maxine symposium at MRS. So the whole thing's Maxines. So of course we're there, and basically when I went there the first time, it was just like a big introduction of people that are related to our group in some way, essentially like our group, Michelle Barsoom's group at Drexel, and then like all the tangential groups that have come like from that are now at like other places. This was a lot of the people I was introduced to. So I knew them. They knew who I was because they know my PI, and they know like Drexel. Some of them were from Drexel. So essentially, like once that connection is made, the next time I went, I didn't need to be introduced to them. Maybe I was meeting their new students, or, people that weren't at the first conference. And, essentially you're just kind of expanding your network. Like your base network doesn't disappear most of the time. Like if you've made an impression, they'll remember who you are. So I would say it gets easier every time because your network doesn't like reset every time. It just gets bigger.
This is something that I think is important, regardless of if you're like academic focused or industry focused. But how do you like keep that relationship going beyond just that conference, so that initial connection doesn't just like kind of fizzle out from there? Like, how do you keep that relationship offline? How do you keep in contact with them until maybe the next time that you see them in person?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a bit more challenging. But the first thing I would say is connect with them, like on LinkedIn, things like that. It's good just so they remember who you are. Put a name to a face outside of the conference. If you can connect with them on that level, and then also if there was some reason for the connection, like say you're interested in working with them or working with their students, or if they're a student and you want to create some kind of collaboration, then the first thing you should do is send an email and actually establish, CC your PI, add make it real, and then it will not just fizzle away probably. So it also just depends on what is the relationship exactly. If you just made friends with some other mutual students at the conference, just connect with them. That's fine. Or, you're great friends, maybe you're hanging out, you make a group chat or something. But if they're in a nearby university, other than that, I would say at the next level where it's you're building relationships for networking, for job growth, in the future, just making those connections. If it makes sense, exchanging an email, if there's some reason, don't just shoot them an email so they remember you. If it's a collaboration or if there's something you want to connect with them about, or there are people that we don't have any ongoing collaborations with that I have emailed because we've had discussions, to have a discussion with them about certain things in the field. I know this person's a leader in this field, but maybe not, someone so far out that they're going to be why is this person emailing me? Then, I'll reach out to them and be you want to have a discussion about this? I have some thoughts, you have some thoughts, pick each other's brain kind of thing.
Yeah. And one thing that I would add to that, in terms of just maintaining relationships is, don't always reach out when you need something, but in terms of, just as networking is super powerful, right? So to maintain that, just potentially set monthly or, every other month, a reminder to connect with people, reconnect with them, and use a research paper in the field and say hey, I read this, thought you would be interested in this. These are my thoughts, would love to hear yours, and just send that along. And that's a good way to potentially just maintain that conversation there.
Oh yeah, for people who are your peers, I don't even have to think about it because I'm just constantly bombarding my friends with papers and stuff. So yeah, I made friends with some people like GRC, for example, that. I have their number. I'll just send a paper to them over text and just be hey, yeah, I was reading this today. So yeah, for me, I'm definitely gonna bombard them with papers, but that's just me. But I just meant more for the when you build those those connections to say other PIs and stuff. I've met a lot of great PIs, some even connected to our group, like Michael Nagy, Babak Anasori. These are people who came from Drexel at some point and are professors. I've met both of them. I don't just email them offhand, to be hey, how's it going? But if there was a reason, I know their research field, maybe I see something that is tangentially related, I might email them and ask them to CC their PhD student, or if it's one of the ones that I know, I'll just add them immediately and be hey, do we have thoughts on this? Maybe. Probably though, when it comes to stuff like that, it's usually there's a PI filter. So first I probably bother my boss and be do we want to bother them? And then probably yes, then we go on, So I would say it just depends on what tier you're at on the relationship, But yeah, for my peers that are my friends, yeah, just always stay connected. I message them offhand all the time.
For sure, for sure. So, of all of the conferences you've attended, do you remember, is there a specific talk that stood out to you the most, or a moment that stuck with you?
There's probably a few, but if I had to narrow it down, I can narrow it down to two or
Sure.
10, but so I would say one that really stuck out to me was when I went to a conference and saw my PI give a talk. That's not when he's talking to the group. How does he talk when he's talking about a vision for the whole field to a large audience, giving a a keynote kind of talk. You see that and you're you can really get a good perspective of why your PI is your PI. And it's makes sense now. And the other one I would say that stands out was probably the first time. There's quite a few, but one of the easy answers I would say was the first time I saw Stanley Whittingham give a talk, just because I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't know like how large the perspective was going to be, but I was like, it was like right after he had gotten the Nobel Prize, so I was like, I was interested in hearing what he had to say. But I want to point out, like, those are just like kind of like the bigger examples, but like I have lots of talks where I'll go and I've never heard of this person before, and then they'll just blow my mind and be like, I'll be like, this is a great talk. Like I remember there was a talk, like I'm not gonna like name them, but there was a talk at like 2 conferences ago that I went to, and basically I knew them like from one other talk, and I thought that talk was good, but like I didn't know a ton about them. They went up and they gave this like big talk, and I was like, everyone was like hype after, like that's how good it was. Like, people came out of the room like excited, and sometimes that's not how it goes with science. So like to put it like that was like it was one of those ones where it's like you've got people who are like you got, I would say the people that are like, oh, like I'm probably gonna go to industry, and then they're like, postdoc maybe, like really getting people excited about like science. So I just want to point out, like, that can happen like with any talk. You just have to find that speaker that they've got that great research that they're ready to put out, and they know how to explain it. Yeah, and I've had that happen a number of times, like people that I've never networked again, like with, even like just because like there's not like a real overlap in the work. Like I remember like I saw a talk at like a second MRS meeting I went to, similar thing. Like they just gave like this killer talk. It was so good. I got a chance to talk to them afterwards. Like it was great. And that's it. I keep tabs on their research, but like we're not connected at all. Like I just like have a Google Scholar alert. I'm like, nice.
So yeah, going off that, how many times have you gone to a talk and it's like directly affected your research, either with like a new idea or completely changing what you thought was the actual cause?
Definitely fairly often. Like I would say that I try to take a lot of inspiration from what other like people are doing, like the hard work that's being put in like tangential fields. I would say that usually though it's like slight nudges. Like I'm not going to go to a talk usually and just be like, whoa, like dropping everything, we're doing that, or like or like, oh, like this explains everything, now my research is complete. That can happen, but it's rarer. Usually it's more like a nudge, like, oh, I saw this talk, it reminds me like this is really a problem, we weren't focusing on this before. Like all right, one example, like in my own research, not to get too into the weeds, like I was looking at like some cathode stuff, positive part of the battery, and this person gave good perspective on anode stuff, and this is in like zinc batteries, so you have like metal dendrite issues. And it made me like, I was like, we need to think about this a little bit more, like on our side, and like we do now, like we do that, like we're doing both. So it's like, it wasn't just that, like that was like one nudge, and then like there was a paper in the field that came out, like that's another nudge, and like another nudge, and it should just kind of like let the works slightly move you, but like don't let them like completely change your, like you're probably on the right path already. Like don't like just give up what you're doing because you saw this. No, there are exceptions to what I just said though, for sure. Sometimes people see something and they're like, that is the future, and then they go do it and they're right, but it's usually a nudge.
For sure, for sure. So then I know you mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but you either, as a graduate student, you either give a talk or you present a poster. So from your personal experience, how did you prepare for, either a poster presentation or giving a talk? And like, can you just explain what that experience was like in terms of its fulfillment and what you enjoyed about it?
Yeah, I would say the most important thing, personally, I think, for a talk is that your time is correct. Everyone hates you if you go over time. It's just a fact, like actually, like seriously, that is the most important thing. It's like that, then the quality of the talk. Because people who go over time, then everyone is behind. Like it just like throws everything off. Like, and also if you don't have any, because then like there's no time for questions even. Like what if you had a good talk but you went over time, and then no one can ask about it? There's no like, the questions help the growth. Like that's how the connections start getting built. Someone asks a question and then maybe there's a follow-up after the meeting, and that's how collaboration starts. So good timing. For the poster side, I would say make sure your poster itself is like well presented and looks right. Like this shouldn't be thrown together last minute. Like have some people check it. I mean, I've been there. I've had some errors on posters before. It's not great. Like, don't do that. Get it checked by somebody that is not related to it at all. That's great. And then someone that is related to it. That's my suggestion. Both those people not being your PI, and then also send it to your PI. And for the poster side, kind of just prepare an elevator pitch and just kind of give that. You'll mostly like in all reality, you're kind of going to give that on repeat to like the initial, like someone just says like, tell me about your work. You give them that. Then there's like an open dialogue discussion. Poster sessions are usually like served with like snacks and drinks. It's more casual. But you should still be able to give a good like elevator pitch, because it's not like it's just students walking around. Like most of the PIs are there too. Someone might see your work and then be like, oh, like I know your boss, like we should work together on this. And then they find their student and they come talk to you for an hour, and there you go. I think posters are a great way to start networks, like networking and like collaborations. Like I always attend all the poster sessions, whether I'm giving one or not. One, to see what other people are doing. Two, it's definitely like one of the better networking spots.
That's awesome. Well, I think you shared a ton of value with us in terms of, how to make the most of MSE conferences. So first of all, thank you so much, Kyle. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and it's always a pleasure having you on the It's a Material World team. So thank you for jumping on the show with us today.
Yeah, of course. Anytime.
As a materials engineer, we can make an impact in nearly every single industry. But with that versatility comes a lot of different options to choose from. So if you have no idea which industry or position is right for you, believe me, you're not alone. I've been there, done that. But just for a moment, imagine narrowing down your ideal role and company by the end of this week. Imagine being able to secure your dream job offer without having to apply to hundreds of job openings. Our online course, MSE Academy, includes video testimonials, resumes, interview prep, and mentorship from materials engineers who have been in your shoes. We also connect our members with companies and industry professionals in our expansive network to help accelerate your job search as much as possible. To learn more and get started, simply click the link in the description below. And if you enroll within the next 24 hours, we'll add 3 bonus career development resources. I hope to see you there.